All right, good afternoon. We have our guest already here, Nicholas Kumjian, who is the head of the Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. He'll brief you, obviously, on the situation in Myanmar as soon as we are done with each other. Tomorrow, they'll be briefing here at 11 o'clock by Omar Sniber, the president of the Human Rights Council. Then at 1 p.m., there'll be a briefing by Ambassador Barbara Woodward in her capacity as president of the Security Council for the month of November. And lastly, after that, there'll be a briefing by Richard Bennett, the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. I'll start off with a statement on the DPRK. The Secretary General strongly condemns the launch today of a long-range ballistic missile by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The DPRK's continued launches of missiles using ballistic missile technology are clear violations of relevant Security Council resolutions. The Secretary General remains concerned about the situation in the Korean Peninsula. He's consistently called for de-escalation and the full implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, as well as an environment that is conducive to dialogue and the resumption of talks. Diplomatic engagement remains the only pathway to sustainable peace and the complex and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Turning to Lebanon, and first of all, on the peacekeeping front, our Blue Helmets, who remain at their positions and continue their essential work to monitor the report and to report to us and to the international community what is actually happening on the ground. They tell us that intense clashes between Hezbollah and the Israel Defense Forces have been reported in Khiam, in an area in UNIFIL's Sector East. The Israeli Defense Forces had continued its strike across Lebanon, including in the south, Baalbek and near Beirut, with multiple casualties reported. Hezbollah's rocket fire has reportedly killed 5 people today near Metula in northern Israel. Yesterday, a UNIFIL position near the Blue Line, south of the Shaba Farms, also in Sector East, Shaba Village, sustained minor damage to its barracks and a vehicle due to a nearby explosion. We once again remind all involved in this conflict of the inviolability of UN premises and that those premises must be respected, as well as our peacekeepers, both uniformed and civilian. The intensifying hostilities are, of course, extremely concerning. We urge all actors to stop violence immediately and avail themselves of the diplomatic initiatives to end this conflict. We continue to support efforts towards de-escalation and a diplomatic solution. The UN peacekeeping mission also remains focused on helping local communities. This week, they delivered essential humanitarian aid to the municipality of Tyre amid challenging situation in South Lebanon. The aid included medical devices as well as medicines. On the humanitarian front, as in many conflicts, children and women are bearing the brunt of the ongoing hostilities. In a statement today, UNICEF's executive director, Catherine Russell, said that 166 children have been killed in Lebanon since October 2023. That's what Lebanese authorities are telling UNICEF, while thousands of others have been injured. UNICEF is on the ground to provide emergency psychological support to 1,000 children and their caregivers. For its part, the UN Population Fund says the conflict is also impacting more than 10,000 pregnant women, including 1,300 who are expected to give birth soon amid the significant damage to infrastructure and, of course, a health system that is extremely strained. The displacement crisis remains a key issue. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that today the Israeli army issued new orders for people to leave their homes in several villages, as well as in the Rashidiyeh Palestinian refugee camp, which is located in the south. This is the first time the Israeli army has called for the evacuation of a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. OCHA says that yesterday's displacement orders and strikes in Baalbek and surrounding areas forced thousands of people to flee their homes. Many of them spent their night in their vehicles. And yesterday, the humanitarian coordinator for Lebanon, Imran Riza, visited Akkar near Tripoli, which is currently host to 70,000 people who've been forced to flee and are in conditions that you can only imagine. And turning to Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tell us that the scale of destruction is overwhelming, affecting nearly every area of the Gaza Strip. In the north, intense hostilities continue, especially in Jabalia, Bet Laia, and Beit Hanun. OCHA tells us that the third floor of the Kamal Adwan hospital was bombed today, resulting in the loss of medical supplies that was delivered just 5 days ago. The delivery had been done by the United Nations through a joint mission of the World Health Organization with the support of OCHA. Hospitals are under assault and rescue teams are unable to work due to the arrest of personnel and the confiscation of essential equipment, including ambulances and a fire truck. Meanwhile, forced displacement continues to be reported. According to our partners, some 300 Palestinians were displaced today from the north to the south through the Al-Rashid checkpoint. This included women and children and elderly. Within northern Gaza, Palestinians staying around the Indonesian hospital and the Tal al-Arabi school in the Al-Fakhura area were displaced today to Beit Laia. Since the start of this latest ground operation on October 6th, about 100,000 people have been displaced from North Gaza Governorate to Gaza City. OCHA also tells us that aside from limited missions, almost no aid operations have been permitted into Gaza, where dwindling supplies, high casualties, frequent airstrikes on healthcare facilities, and widespread displacement continue to worsen an already dramatic humanitarian situation. The siege surrounding Jabalia refugee camp and nearby areas remain in effect, Also, meanwhile, in the West Bank, OCHA tells us that 3 Palestinians were killed during the Israeli air raid in Tulkarm and Nur Shams refugee camps yesterday and today. One of the raids involved an airstrike, armed clashes, and extensive damage to infrastructure, with medical teams facing prolonged access delays, while water, electricity, and internet services were also disrupted. Since 7 October of last year, 736 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. At least 12 people were killed by Israeli settlers, the rest mostly by Israeli forces. During the same period, 23 Israelis, comprising of 16 members of Israeli forces and 6 settlers, were killed by Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Meanwhile, between the 1st and the 28th of this month still, OCHA documented nearly 270 settler-related incidents affecting Palestinians and their property, with more than half directly linked to the olive harvest. And the humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmale, today strongly condemned the deadly attack in Kharkiv city last night. First responders and humanitarian organizations provided medical and psychological aid, distributed hot meals, as well as shelter materials. In the last 24 hours alone, scores of civilians have been killed and injured across the country amidst attacks in Kharkiv, Kherson, and Donetsk, Sumy, and Dnipro regions. Those attacks damaged civilian infrastructure, as we are told by local authorities. The latest wave of attack comes just one day after Mr. Schmal briefed member states and urged support for Ukrainians who are facing increased risk, displacement, and uncertainty as winter is approaching. The continued damage to energy infrastructure due to attacks could increase the challenge civilians will face as winter approaches. We and our partners are working closely with the government to assist 1.8 million people this winter. Mr. Schmal called for early funding of the winter response plan to ensure timely, life-saving assistance, especially in frontline areas. And also related to Ukraine this morning, the Security Council heard a briefing on threats to international peace and security. Briefing on our behalf was Adeji Ebo, the Director and Deputy High Representative for Disarmament. He said that as we approach the tragic milestone of 1,000 days since the start of the invasion of Ukraine, we continue to witness unimaginable levels of civilian deaths and injuries, with escalating Russian attacks reported across the country. He urged all concerned to refrain from any steps that may lead to further spillover and intensification of the war. He also reiterated our support for all meaningful effort to bring a joint, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine in line with international law, the UN Charter, and relevant United Nations General Assembly resolutions. Those remarks were shared with you. Our Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, is in Doha for the 30th anniversary of the International Year of the Family Conference, focusing on families and contemporary megatrends. Yesterday, she met with Her Highness Sheikha Moza bin Nasser to discuss the importance of quality education and the need to accelerate progress towards the sustainable development goals. She also had a number of other events, and she met today with the Finance Minister, Mr. Ali Ahmed Al-Kuwari. They discussed various issues, including ways to better address the debt crisis. She then visited the Al Thumana complex, where she interacted with Palestinian women and children. During her visit, she had the opportunity to sit with the women and participate in a number of activities that are part of her psychosocial support. And in Cuba, in the wake of the hurricane that hit Cuba, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has released $3.5 million from the UN Central Emergency Response Fund. That is to address urgent needs in the areas of shelter, health, food, and water. This allocation follows an earlier release of an emergency cash grant of $100,000 for the delivery of essential items. The resident coordinator, Francisco Pinchon, together with OCHA, the World Food Program, and UNICEF, as well as authorities and first responders, visited the areas impacted by the hurricane over the last couple of days. They reported widespread flooding is making rescue operations and people's ability to access essential services such as water, food, and healthcare extremely challenging, with ongoing power outages and damages to roads, further disrupting the communications and the response. We are supporting the government-led response, including through distribution of pre-positioned food, medicine, hygiene kits, and other essential supplies. Assistance will expand tomorrow when the $33 million action plan is launched. This new plan aims to reach 478,000 people impacted. And in South Sudan, the Secretary General's Special Representative and head of our peacekeeping mission there, Nicholas Fink-Haysom, urged political leaders to produce a clear and realistic work plan for implementing outstanding provisions of the peace agreement. The clock is ticking, he warned, at a meeting of the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, adding that limited progress has been made since the government announced an extension of the transitional period and delayed elections back in September. Lastly, today is World Cities Day. In his message, the Secretary General said with more than half of the population and 70% of global greenhouse emissions, cities are on the forefront of fighting climate change. That's why I bike to work. The energy and vision of youth leading the charge, youth is me, is part of the change that we need. Edie, then Gabby, then Donna.
Thank you, Steph. A follow-up on Kamal Adwan Hospital. Mm-hmm. You said the third floor was destroyed. Is the hospital functioning at all? What's happened to the patients who were there?
Well, I think there were very few patients there. I think the word functioning, when it comes to a number of these hospitals in Gaza, may be misleading. I think these hospitals are trying to survive. The medical staff that is still there is doing their best to try to serve the patients that remain there. You know, through great effort, we delivered goods just 5 days ago. Those goods are now destroyed. So I think they're doing their best in a situation that defies words.
Has the UN raised this issue with the Israeli authorities?
I have no doubt that our colleagues on the ground have done so.
And a second question on something totally different. The UN Security Council adopted a resolution today extending the mandate of the political mission in Libya for 3 months. to put pressure on the Secretary General to appoint a new special representative. Can you give us an update on that?
The update is ongoing. I think the Secretary General already feels under pressure to appoint one. It is not an easy post to fill, finding the right person who's willing to serve and finding the person that is also can get through the filter of our 15 friends down the hall. Gabby.
Thanks, Steph. Following up on Kamal Al-Adwan Hospital, do you have any reason to believe that that was not specifically targeted? They could have hit anywhere in the hospital, but they hit specifically the floor where WHO medical supplies were at.
I can only attest to the damage. I can't attest or speculate on the motivation or the targeting. Was it specifically targeted? Was it not? Was it a mistake? Was it not a mistake? That's not a question for us to answer. We can only witness with extreme sadness the result.
And Amos Hochstein, the U.S. envoy, is in Israel. There's been some leaked documents allegedly about a 60-day ceasefire being brokered by the United States and others. Is Hochstein planning to meet with anybody from the UN?
Is he planning?
Yeah. What I meant to say. I'm sorry.
Yes. I'm trying to get a real-time update for you on that, and I will get back to you.
Thanks.
Dawn, then Ibtisam.
Thanks, Steph. I have a question on polio, and forgive me if you gave an update, I was late. But in his remarks to the Security Council this week, the Israeli ambassador said that the polio vaccine campaign will commence in northern Gaza in the coming days. Do you have any?
It's my understanding that it may resume over the weekend.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my second question is, you're familiar with the letter that the U.S. sent to Israel about the changes they wanted to see in humanitarian aid in Gaza. One of the requests that were made in the letter included allowing people in Muwasi in the humanitarian zone to move inland before winter. And I was just wondering if you've seen any movement on this. Has the UN been approached?
I haven't been briefed on any movement. I can ask my humanitarian colleagues. Ibtisam, then Fatih, then Deji.
I know you talked about Tulkarem, the attacks in Tulkarem, and but I didn't hear you, or maybe I missed that, saying something about the destruction of UNRWA office near Tulkarem in a refugee camp in Shams.
I haven't received that information to date, but I'll check with my UNRWA colleagues.
And then Mukhayyam Nur Shams, the refugee camp. On Lebanon and the orders that the Israelis give to Al-Rashidi camp, on refugee camp, Palestinian. What does that, I mean, for you, when you look at the attacks that Israel is, with their legislation, and now going after Palestinians who are refugees in Lebanon, do you have any comments on that more than just giving us this information?
I mean, again, it seems that evacuation orders are hitting or being given to wide swath of the population, different areas in Lebanon. Whether people are forced to, whether they are Palestinian refugees, whether they're Lebanese or Syrian refugees in Lebanon, everybody is forced to move and is forced to try to survive in an active combat zone. And that's why we've spoken out against all of this, regardless of who it impacts. Fethi and then Deji.
Thank you, Steph. Please let me switch to the Asia-Pacific region and with the DPRK recent launch. The Secretary General started to engage with the regional leaders, namely in Japan, South Korea, and China, with regard to the what seems to be a non-stop path of violations of UN Security Council resolutions. Add to that the leasing of thousands of North Korean special forces to Russia in its fight with Ukraine. Does the Secretary General have any plan of engagement
he
with the
has,
region?
these are issues that have been constantly raised by the Secretary General with his interlocutors in the region, pushing them to all move in the same direction, which is to try to get diplomatic talks back on track. Deji.
Yes, two questions. First, a follow-up on the polio campaign. You said, according to your understanding, it will probably resume in northern Gaza this weekend or maybe next week. But who will do that? I mean, the phase one and the previous ones, we heard about from Mr. Lazzarini that UNRWA actually took a large role in it. So UNRWA will still doing this in the northern Gaza?
That is correct.
With the bills in
the laws
things?
that were passed will not be, if as far as I understand, will not be implemented for 87 days.
Yeah,
now,
I know. Yeah.
But there is no alternative to UNRWA and UNICEF and WHO running this critical campaign.
So I just want to confirm
Yes,
that UNRWA is going
that's
to
correct.
Okay. So second question. Today is Halloween. If Secretary General is invited to a Halloween party, which costume would he prefer? President Trump or Vice President Harris?
He would dress up as a peace dove. Okay, on that note, I want to thank Nicholas for being extremely, extremely patient. My colleague Shireen will moderate. All right, a lot of serious business this morning. A few programming notes to share with you. Once I'm done, you will hear from our friend Sharon Birch, the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly. Tomorrow, you will have a heavy day. We've asked Amy Pope, the head of the International Organization for Migration, who's currently in Sudan, to brief you. She'll be here at 11 a.m. via video conference from Port Sudan to brief you on her ongoing trip. At noon, you will have to deal with me. And then at 1 p.m., there will be a briefing by the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and Israel. And that commission includes Navi Pillay, Milun Kotari, and Chris Sidoti. Then at 2 p.m., Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, will be here live in person in this very room. This morning, the Secretary General is in Cali in Colombia, where he is attending the high-level segment of the 16th meeting of the Conference of Parties on the Convention of Biological Diversity. In his remarks, he highlighted that nature is life, and yet we are waging a war against it, a war where there can be no winner. He's in fact about to deliver those remarks, and he's expected to warn that no country, rich or poor, is immune to the devastation inflicted by climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, pollution, adding that these environmental crises are intertwined and they, of course, know no borders. The Secretary General noted the framework adopted 2 years ago in Montreal. The world made bold commitments to living in harmony with nature by mid-century. He said we must now turn those promises into acts. This morning, he also met with, he had a series of bilateral. He met with Leslie Voltaire, the president of the Transitional Presidential Council of Haiti. They agreed on the need to expedite the political transition towards holding elections. In the meeting, the Secretary General appealed to Haitian stakeholders to set aside their differences and work together for Haiti's peace and security. This afternoon, the Secretary General will engage in discussions with indigenous people and local communities, as well as representatives of civil society, including youth and women. and I think he just met with also Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia. Tomorrow on the sidelines, he will speak to an event on plastic pollution organized by the UN Environment Program. He will also speak to journalists at a press conference before heading out of Cali and going back to New York. You saw that last night we issued a statement in the Secretary General's name in which he expressed his deep concern at the adoption yesterday by the Israeli Knesset of two laws concerning the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, better known to all of us as UNRWA, and the laws which, if implemented, would likely prevent UNRWA from continuing its essential work in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, as mandated by the General Assembly of these United Nations. The Secretary General emphasized that UNRWA is the principal means by which essential assistance is supplied to Palestine refugees in the occupied Palestinian territory. There is no alternative to UNRWA. He calls on Israel to act consistently with its obligations under the Charter of the UN and its other obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and those concerning the privileges and immunities of the United Nations. National legislation cannot